welcome to the Triumphant Birth Podcast. My name is Jamie Reichschlager if you're new here. And first of all, thank you for being here. I'm holding my babies on my lap. If you cannot tell that already, that's what that is, as I'm recording this introduction. And today, for this episode this week, we have Marie Rian. Marie is a personal friend of mine. She is a midwife. And so here in Wisconsin, she's a certified professional midwife and a licensed midwife. She is also a very, very wise woman. She's knowledgeable in homeopathy, in herbal medicine. And I just wanted to give a disclaimer, of course, that this podcast in general is not medical advice. We all know this. And I also wanted to let you know that I am breaking this conversation into two parts. So today, what you're going to hear is Marie's origin story in addition to her own birth story. So I wanted to let you know that in case it feels like it cuts off sort of abruptly. Don't worry, we're going to continue the conversation next week when we get more into the homeopathy side of it, how it works, how it can be used in pregnancy, birth, postpartum, and motherhood. So thank you for being here. Let's get into the conversation. Hi guys, welcome to the Triumphant Birth Podcast. I'm Jamie, and I am joined by Marie Rian. And as I was thinking about this conversation, I was crying about it. I'm like, oh, this is going to be a good episode.
No pressure.
I was thinking, how am I going to introduce you? She's my midwife. Nobody else. She's my midwife. Marie is someone who is super special to me. She made an impact, and this is weird because you're sitting right here and I'm saying she, but Marie is the first experience of midwifery in action that I've had as a doula. And that has, I think I said on my last episode, as I was kind of doing a sneak peek for this week, I was saying, you sort of ruined midwifery for me because literally, like the experiences I've had after, there's just nothing like it. Like you showed me what true midwifery was. And I think it's appropriate that this episode will be coming out the week of Thanksgiving because I am so, so grateful for you showing me what that looks like. So a little bit of background and a little bit of context, and we'll get into Marie's origin story and background and all of that. But for some context, when I was a little baby doula, quite literally fumbling around, we had a mutual client. And so, at that birth, that was still to date, the longest birth that I've attended. And through that experience, I got to see the entirety of what midwife skills look like, from emotional support, troubleshooting, all of the medical things, of course, the comfort techniques, how to work with husbands and mothers in the room, all of those things. And I'm just so, so happy that I got to see what that looked like, because like I said, every other experience after that was like, wait, what? This is midwifery too, but it's not that kind of midwifery. And I just absolutely loved it. I fell in love with that approach to birth. And that particular birth was a planned home birth, of course. So let me back up a little bit. So you are a home birth midwife.
Yes.
And today we're going to be talking about a lot of different things, probably.
Yeah.
It'll be a little on home birth, a little on homeopathy, and we are going to go wherever the conversation takes us.
Yeah.
So what else would you like to add as far as a bullet point introduction of who you are?
I don't know. I think, let's just get wild and see what happens.
Love it. Okay. So
I had kind of forgotten for a minute that was how we met each other.
Yeah. And then, so fast forward. So this is the other piece of it.
Yes.
Then I'm like, I get pregnant with our first son, and I had him in 2019. And of course, you were the obvious choice for that. So I had a home birth with you, with my first son, and it was
Great.
amazing. It was amazing. And we used homeopathy in that birth as well. So maybe we can get into that a little bit after we talk about you and how you got into all of this.
Yeah. Yeah.
So why home birth? Like, how were you introduced to birth work, and what made you choose to be a home birth midwife?
Yeah. So it's a little bit odd. I used to, when I was in midwifery school, a lot of my classmates had kind of transformative experiences, personal experiences, and I used to say I didn't have like a giant vulva come and talk to me and say, you need to be a midwife, right? I was in school for, I wasn't sure exactly what. I'd thought about kinesiology, I'd thought about OT, I had thought about a lot of different things, and I ended up doing my degree in psychology with a focus in women's studies. And this was a long time ago, right? Because it was a long time ago. During one of the women's studies in health, it was like a women's health class through the women's studies department at UW Madison. They showed the video Gentle Birth Choices. I don't know if you've ever seen this, but if you ever want to see like 1980s, 1990s birth center, different things. It was an introduction to midwives and natural birth, and I was like, this makes sense. Yeah. And that was kind of what I thought. This makes sense. That would have been 1999. And I think that was when I asked for the catalog to the school I eventually went to in 2004, the first time. And I realized, I was my mom's sixth cesarean. She had 10 kids, and one of my sisters, it was an emergency. She had a cord prolapse. It was the 60s, and the idea of VBAC really didn't exist that much. And then also this type of cesarean she had, and also the spacing between my sister and my next sister, and then that sister and the next sister. This is pretty close.
Sure.
So she had a lot of surgical births, and a very Catholic family. So we didn't talk about reproduction. We didn't talk about sex. We didn't talk about babies. And I was the youngest. So it wasn't like I was around people who were having babies until later. I think I was, some cousins and people who had babies. But I didn't have any great interest in or love of or any of that stuff. This just kind of came out of nowhere. And I knew I wanted to primarily work with women. I knew I wanted to work with people during doing like mental support and physical support. And I knew I wanted to work with people when they were healthy. And that was kind of what pushed me away from doing counseling and therapy and psychology, because I thought I would probably get really overwhelmed working with people only in a space where they were coming because of problematic stuff. Just, of course, like over the years of being a midwife, you really can't separate any of this stuff. And pregnancy, like any other time in life, is a mix of health and wellness and of struggles, right? And so you can't have all one or all the other. But for the most part, as midwives, we work with normal, healthy, pregnant people. The other thing that really has informed my midwifery care, and even just like the process of becoming, is the idea for me that I really like to see families become confident families. I like to see people walk into parenting. Maybe they're scared, maybe they're like, who's going to leave me with this baby? But they don't walk away from having their babies most of the time when you work in a home or a birth center world, or even in just a world where parents are trusted and people are trusted to know about their own bodies, and they're trusted to be able to care for their own babies. They get to walk away with a different relationship with their kids, with a different relationship with parenting, with a different sense of capacity and ability, and knowing and being able to trust their own knowing in a
Yes.
different way.
It's a whole different ballgame when you are confident and
Yes.
when you can trust, like you said, when you can trust yourself and your relationship with your children and going through that together, it makes the difference.
Yes.
A lot of times,
Yep.
what I see
Yep.
between, I mean, your whole parenthood journey
Yep.
is completely different.
Yeah, it really is. It's really, it's really, even families that have kiddos who end up in the NICU, for instance, if they have that underlying sense of this is my baby, it, they're not shaken out of it in the same way as parents who have no sense of control over what's happening, and a lot of people who are telling them they don't know what they're doing, or they don't know what's best. Right?
It's trauma prevention at the highest
It totally
level.
is. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I started thinking about midwifery in 1999, and a lot of people say, there's no way you want to do this. There's no way you want to do this. How do you know you want to do it? You've never been to a birth. How do you know you want to do this? You've never given birth. You don't have any kids. And I was always like, I just know I want to do this work.
That's how you know you are a midwife, is because you don't choose it. It chooses you.
Kind of, except that I kept hitting like closed door after closed door after closed door. And it took a lot of years to finally get to a space where I figured out how to move forward, right? And then in that process had a lot of really beautiful experiences, and I got to train with really amazing people. I worked at a birth center in Florida and did a combination of home birth and birth center birth. Worked with 2 other midwives down there. In the course of training, I was trained by, I think, 7 different midwives. Wow. 2 of them who had 1,500 births under their belts and 30 years of experience. 1 and 2 who were just like the most amazing, kindest, generous teachers who wanted to make something that was sustainable because that wasn't their experience as midwives in training.
Yes.
And that's totally translated in how I like to work with my students in a way that is compensatory and generous and forgiving and not punitive.
Graceful.
Graceful.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's all built on the gifts that I was given by the people who brought me to where I am right now.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's so important to, I'm so honored to have this conversation with you because, I'm not a midwifery student. I think I have the heart of a midwife.
Yeah.
But having this conversation with you and amplifying voices of those teachers, because you are a teacher now.
Yeah.
And because of those gifts that have been given to you, you're able to give those to other people. And I think these conversations are gifts in and of themselves because you can't separate yourself from the way you interact with your clients and the way you hold space for them is something that I had never experienced before. And it is a gift to be able to be in the presence of someone who can hold space truly, including and especially when things might be uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. And that is the part that our society does not do a good job of at all.
Totally. Yeah, I 100% agree with that.
And when we can be there and be uncomfortable with things and still be okay and present, that's when healing happens. That's when we can move forward and make progress in different things. That's what birth is.
Yep.
But it translates into life in general, everything in life. And so why would you be punitive with your, with your students? But it's so common from what I hear. It's really common. And I've talked in other episodes about, the hierarchical nature just in the medical model, but that exists outside of the hospital too.
It does. Yep. Yeah. We have a really, and I think it's very socially specific to specifically being a white woman in America. And the way our relationship society, and as a society with authority is really interesting, right? And I just like to get past that. If there's an authority in the room, it's the person who knows what's happening in their own body, right?
Absolutely.
It's about shared experiences. And that doesn't mean that you're like left out in the cold, or you're left out on your own. It's not going to be like, well, then you go to go ahead and, you know?
Yes.
A very coherent sentence. But I've never really understood the whole approach of people who say things to their clients or patients when their clients or patients come to them and say, I've noticed this, or I've studied this. And they say, well, obviously you don't need me then, or whatever the case is. And that happens all the time, right? And why are we so caught up in this idea of having to have authority? It doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah. It seems in that specific instance, it seems like it's so tied to ego. Like,
it is.
Like, oh, I must be, and self-worth, and like, oh, you must know better.
Somehow this reflects on the other person. Like what? Yeah.
We need to get out of our heads.
We really do.
So much and into our own bodies. And that's what you do such a fabulous job of. So you personally have made me a better person and mom. And I'm just so thankful for you.
You're welcome. But I'm going to push back and say you've made yourself a better person. And mom, it's just having support, right? It's that support to become the person that you need to become, right? Not what somebody else wants for you.
Yeah, that's such a huge life lesson that I'm still learning at the ripe old age of, sometimes I'm like, sit back, I'm like, I am 40 years old and I am learning these things that we kind of reflect and think that sometimes we should have learned these things when we were 12 or whatever, but everybody's going at their own.
Exactly.
Yes.
And every year I look back and I'm like, wow, I'm not the same person I was then. Right?
Yeah.
We all change so much so quickly if we're lucky.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Awesome.
Yeah.
Is there anything else in your journey of like deciding to become a midwife? So you had these amazing teachers, and then what brought you to Wisconsin from Florida?
Okay, so there were some things in between. So I came to Wisconsin. I'm from Minneapolis area, and my family's all there. A number of my sisters and sisters-in-law had home births or worked with midwives. So that was part of the introduction that I had to midwifery. And in fact, my oldest sister, had her first baby with midwives in the hospital when I was 19, and I got her all these books on like midwifery and doula work. And that was when I was starting to get interested in it too. So that all started at about the same time, right? And I met my now spouse in Madison, and I was living there after school and staying there, and I had the most random set of jobs. Like, I worked in landscaping. I worked as a secretary for the neurosurgery department, and I worked in a wood stripping shop. I mean, I had really random. I've worked in cafes. I've worked as a baker, and I really, really, really wanted to move forward with midwifery training, and everything required having doula training, and everything required having birth experience, and I was just not finding it anywhere. And one of my other sisters, I have 5 sisters, so I'm not going to name them, asked if I would consider moving back to Minneapolis to be at her birth. And so I ended up moving. Like, there's more to it than that, but I moved back to Minneapolis for like a year and a half, lived with my sister during her pregnancy and her partner, and did turtle women doula training in Minneapolis, which was fabulous, and worked at a cafe and was a baker at a cafe. Ended up not going to my sister's birth. She didn't want me there in the end. So I ended up having to stay at my partner, but lived across town, my boyfriend, at his house for like 72 hours because she had a really long labor. And so I ended up not, the first births I was supposed to go to, I didn't go to. And it was a great lesson in this isn't about you. Guess what? Somebody can change their mind at any minute. It doesn't matter that you don't get caught up in this idea that you moved your whole life here, because you did, but that had nothing to do with what her experience was, right? And ended up being a doula for my coworker's girlfriend. Was really fun. It was her first baby. We were calling the midwives, and they kept telling her not to come in yet and not to come in yet. And I was like, well, I don't know. I guess we don't have to go in yet. And by the time we got in, she was 9 and almost ready to start pushing.
I thought you were going to say that was your first catch.
No, we got there, walking to the hospital with this gigantic birth ball and parking and making it up. And the midwife was so ticked, and she was really mad at me because she thought that I'd kept her home too long. And I was like, we tried.
Yes.
And she had a beautiful birth, right? But man, I did not know what I was doing at all. And it didn't matter. And then I was a doula for my cousin for her third baby, and also had a really different and unusual experience. And in that case, the midwife afterwards, because she had a midwife in the hospital, was super supportive and interested and willing to sign off on my paperwork and talk to me about her training and all of this other stuff. So it was two completely, juxtaposing those two experiences against each other really was also great, because it showed me you can have a really great birth in the hospital. You can have a really great birth in the hospital with a lousy provider. You can have a really great birth in the hospital with a great provider. And interestingly, the physiological parts of those births were the person who had the lousy provider had the easier birth. And the person who had the really great provider needed her, right? But it just really, I just remember thinking during the second one, during my cousin's, that's what I want to be. I don't want to do this. I don't want to be a doula. I have no real desire to be doing this work, and I don't have any influence here that's effective. I want to do that. So that was kind of what sent me in that direction. And then there's a lot more to it, but I ended up driving a car to Texas, flying down to Texas to drive a car back with my boss. And so I got to visit Maternidad La Luz, and I thought I would maybe go to school there, but I was really stressed out by the experience of being there, and I was really confused and how do I move forward with this? And I talked to my sister's midwife, Gail, and said, I don't know what to think. And she said, Anne-Marie, the place that you learn about birth is going to be the place where your body starts to form all of its reactions and responses to birth. So if you learn about birth in a high-stress environment, you're going to go to cortisol. And if you learn about birth in a peaceful and trusting environment, you're going to have an oxytocin response, or you're not going to have that same adrenal response. And so even though all sorts of my intellectual brain were like, this is the place to go, you can get it done, you would be bilingual, I already spoke Spanish, all these things, it didn't fit. And I ended up visiting another one of my sisters who had just had a baby in Massachusetts, and she was like, we should go to the Yale School. And I said, I don't want to be a nurse midwife. And she was like, why not? And I said, because I want to know normal before I know anything else. And let's go visit the school in Maine. And so we drove to Maine on the fly, visited the school I ended up going to. They told me they were full for the fall. And I said, that's okay, I'll apply next year. And the woman in the office was like, just apply anyways. Somebody might drop out. We might end up with a space. This was in June.
Wow.
And I missed my flight home, decided to make my application while I was waiting in the airport. I didn't do the application there, but I decided to do it there. Yeah. Got home, got a call from them that said, somebody dropped out. Get your stuff in as fast as you can. And I got my complete application, including 2 letters of reference, in 3 days.
Wow.
And we moved across the country in August. And so that was so I went to school in Maine. I trained with a midwife in New Hampshire. I trained with a midwife in Portland, kind of small practices, clinical experience. And then once the didactic part was done, we moved to Florida. And we moved from literally a log cabin in the forest with a 2-seater outhouse and a hand pump well and back to Hollywood, Florida. we're like the Beverly Hillbillies. we even had a truck with a tarp on it. It was ridiculous in January. So we moved from like multiple feet of snow to getting in the ocean and being surrounded by Floridians who were like, who are these crazy people who are swimming in the ocean in January and they've got fur coats on? It was just like a really surreal experience. Our radiator died when we pulled into the birth center parking lot. I mean, really, we lost our housing as we crossed into Florida. It's just a lot of wild stuff happened. So we stayed there for a year. I went to a lot of births. I did a lot of clinical work. And then we moved back up to, we lived in Massachusetts for a little bit I was pregnant. We lived with my sister. I took care of her boys. Pat built their kitchen. And then we moved back to Maine, and I helped to open a birth center that was part of the school that I went to. Mm-hmm. They're all, unfortunately, now closed. So, yeah. Yeah, and then we came back to Wisconsin in 2010 because it was really hard to make a living. And we thought we'd be able to go back to Madison and have community there, and I could start a home birth practice. And we knew people already, and that's not how it went at all. I mean, we did move back to Madison. I ended up kind of accidentally getting a job as a midwife at the Madison Birth Center and worked there for a number of years. And then ended up moving up to Appleton to be a midwife at Birthwise. Yeah. So I've, up until 2015, had always done a combination of home and birth center.
Sure. Mm-hmm. Do you track your births? Like number?
Yeah, I mean, we kind of have to.
Yeah?
Yeah.
What are you at right now?
Just over 500, 500 and something. Yeah. I mean, I really have had a number of years in my career where was doing 60 to 80 births a year. Mm-hmm. And I can't sustain that. And I don't give very good care when I'm doing that. And my body starts to fall apart and my marriage starts to fall apart. And like my whole life becomes about other people's bodies and births. Yes. And so for me, now I have a really slow practice, and it's even slower now that I'm in school.
Yeah.
So
500 is so many when you consider
how many most people have seen.
The space. Yes. How many most people have seen. And also, like, if you think about one singular person and their journey from preconception, conception,
totally.
First semester, second, semester, trimester,
yep. Yes.
Whenever they contact you, and then all of the education and the journey that they go through and their partners go through and their family goes through it. Because I remember you saying, bring your mom if she has questions, bring whoever you want. They didn't end up coming. But to go through that whole, what about this home birth thing? What about that entire journey, to think about one person that you hold incredible space for. And then, of course, all of the all the regular things and fabulous information on all of the testing in pregnancy, the ultrasounds, talking through all of that.
Yeah, I
then
do pretty
actually,
intensive care.
Yes, and it's lovely. Yeah. It is wonderful. It's so thorough that it could be. I mean, it's its own education, really. And then the birth itself, and then the postpartum care, that for one person, and you truly, when I was in your care, I felt like I was the only person you were taking care of. Mm-hmm. And that's how you know that you're getting really good care. And that is in such stark contrast to a lot of, definitely the medical model in the hospital. They just don't have the structure for it. It's not a comment on the individuals who are working.
It's not a desire question. Yeah. It's not a capacity question. It is a literal capacity question.
Right.
It's a functional question. You cannot do it.
Yep. Yeah. And even in midwifery, some of the other some of the other midwives, sometimes it's the structure still. But even in private practice, sometimes it's just not there. So where was I going with this? There are so many directions we could go from here.
I know,
now.
right?
Do you feel comfortable talking about your own birth?
Yeah.
How did that go?
It was great. Although, okay, disclaimer. I remember my birth being really great and not that hard. And I remember like talking about this with Pat one day, and he said, I'm not sure you were at the same labor as
okay, but
I was.
I feel like that is a really, really common experience of partners, because I've seen this all the time.
Yes.
Where the partners are like, we're done. Like, no, that was horrible. And they're like sometimes very legitimately traumatized.
Totally.
And I'm not laughing at that, but it's such a different experience of like, they don't understand that when we're going through a contraction, that sometimes the noise, and sometimes not, but a lot of times the noises and all of that, it's like just matching the intensity. And it's actually a way to process that, where they're seeing you just be like, when it is very vocal.
Right.
And then they're like, okay, that was a lot, but they don't get the hormones.
Well, and I think like, I think he had some validity too, because he didn't have that, like he was not traumatized by Hazel's, my daughter is named Hazel, wasn't traumatized by her birth at all. I think he just very much logically was like, you worked for a really long time and you worked really hard. And I know you say that it was easy, like one of the easiest parts of your entire process, which is true because breastfeeding was hell.
Yeah.
And I think you just don't remember some parts of it, which is true. I mean, there are pieces like I had a long prodromal labor. So my midwife was the midwife I had done clinical work with as a student. When I came back and was a very, very brand new midwife who was also pregnant, and then later had a young baby, she and I we had a good friendship. She was just this really amazing and inspiring person for me. She passed away in June. So, woof.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, and I didn't know, like we really lost touch with each other, but man, midwives make an impact and friends make an impact. And she was just such an amazing human being. The first person actually I ever had a profound homeopathic experience with as well. But so she had, I had called her, it was Labor Day, the year that Hazel was born. It was like I went into labor early labor on Monday morning. And our local blueberry picking place had free blueberry picking on Labor Day. So we went and picked blueberries. I woke up at like 6 a.m. feeling like, okay, I'm having contractions, and would like squat down and pick and eat blueberries. And then we went to some garage sales. And then we came home and had like eggs and pesto, and I puked. And it was still like maybe every 6 to 10 minutes. I was like, oh God, this is going to be interesting, right? And so later in the day, I took a remedy. I took a remedy called gelsemium because it seemed like it fit. And I think, like, looking back, I'm pretty sure I had a good instinct on that one.
Okay, so gelsemium?
Yeah, gelsemium sempervirens. It's a frequently used remedy for like it's like his primary indication is stage fright in birth, right? And things being kind of slow and people needing lots of support, and it's an interesting one. Yeah. But yeah, so I tried that, and I called her up, and I was like, I don't know what's happening. And she's like, well, maybe you just wanted to go into labor on Labor Day. And I said, fuck you. It's like, that's not what's happening. I really am having labor. I think I took something to help myself sleep. Like, I had no qualms about doing whatever I needed to support myself to get through what I figured would be long. I always assumed I would have a long labor. I always assumed I would go late, and I always assumed I would have a giant baby, because these are all things that happen in my family. I've had people in my family who've gone to 43 weeks. I've had people in my family have 10.5-pound babies. I've had people in my family have 72-hour labors, and all of them resulting in a really healthy outcome. So I just kind of assumed.
Sure. Those things it's such an interesting, first of all, we all have family stories that we
Right.
kind of hang on to.
Yes.
And I don't want to interrupt you
No,
much.
go.
But it's interesting that those were the stories that you had because of your family, and also attached to the healthy outcome piece. That's not very common.
No, right?
So how far along were you?
I was over 40 weeks, but I wasn't 41. I think I was like 40 weeks and some change.
Okay.
And she wasn't big. She was 7 pounds 2 ounces. She was a peanut, which was a pretty big surprise to me. But yeah, I did have a pretty long prodromal labor. I ended up taking some Unisham to have myself get myself some sleep. We had like steak and portobello mushrooms for dinner, and we walked down to the video store, because this was, when video stores still existed.
I remember that.
And rented some movies. And I remember sitting in bed and having contractions, and Pat was watching Big Mama's House and being so annoyed. Like, this is terrible. And then I kind of snoozed in and out, but I didn't sleep. And then when that was done, we watched Blades of Glory. And that, I laughed. I had never seen it before. I laughed so hard, and laughing so hard, I started having contractions like every 2 to 4 minutes.
Yeah.
And so we called my midwife, and she came, and it was exciting, and we blew up the tub, and I got in the tub, and everything completely stopped. And I also remember thinking, like, oh my God, I don't have any pain. This is so, my back doesn't hurt anymore, because I'd been having constant back pain. I really didn't even know it.
Until it went away?
Till it went away.
Yeah.
And I was kind of drifting off in the tub, and my midwife said, why don't you go lay down in bed? And I said, because it didn't feel good to lay down before. I was really whiny. And she was like, just give it a try. So we went and lay down, and I remember falling asleep. Pat remembers me not sleeping. This is one of the spots where his experience differed from mine. So for me, from 2 a.m. until about 6 a.m, I slept. Mm-hmm. For him, from 2 a.m. until about 6 a.m, I was having contractions and laboring. Yeah. So we got up in the morning, we made eggs, we had breakfast. The midwife, I lived upstairs from the midwife who I worked with and for at the school. We lived in the mother-in-law apartment of their big old main house.
That is so convenient.
So she was literally less than a mile down the street at the school.
Yeah.
She was going to be assisting. She came in and checked in and was like, oh, look, we'll see, it's probably tonight, maybe tomorrow. And my midwife, kind of after we got done eating, suggested a walk in the forest. We went and we walked in the woods. I wanted to lay down on a patch of moss that was really delicious. And I was like, oh, and she said, Anne Marie, get up. You are not having your baby in the woods. I was like, but it's so nice here. It was so weird as a midwife to have these experiences and be like, my intellectual brain is saying, oh, I understand why people want to crawl into their closet right now.
Yeah.
Or like later on when I was pushy, sitting or like going through close to transition and sitting in my bathroom thinking like, this is when I would ask for an epidural, right? So yeah, she gave me remedies. She alternated 2 remedies while we went through the day. I think I might have had some tea or something, but from about 6:30 in the morning until about 10:30 in the morning, it was just kind of putz, let's get good things moving. And then I asked her to leave, and she was like, sure. She left for an hour or so, and Pat and I spent some time together. I can't remember if I had checked myself somewhere in there, and it was like, yeah, we still probably have some work ahead of us.
Okay, so a couple of things.
Yeah.
That a lot of people probably aren't tuned into the fact that you can ask your practitioner to leave.
Right. Right.
So I just wanted to highlight and emphasize that part.
Yep.
And you're the second person that I've had on the podcast now say that they've checked themselves. And I will forever be impressed by that.
It was not very clear.
Most notably because the thing that's in the forefront of my memory is my twin belly. And so there's
no way to get to it.
So I'm just very impressed by people who check themselves.
Well, I have this really visceral memory of when the day before I went in and started labor, losing my mucus plug, and then reaching up and feeling inside and being like, oh my God, there's a head there.
Oh, yeah.
She was really low.
Yeah.
I could feel her head fairly easily. And it was a mind-blowing moment.
Yeah.
It was really wild. And when I was in labor, it was mostly I'm probably somewhere between a 4 and a 6,
Sure.
She didn't want to check. She didn't want to check me unless I wanted to be checked, and I didn't really feel like it. We decided to have sex. I can't call it anything else because it's very functional in labor. There's not a lot of lovemaking that happens. It was extremely effective. She came back an hour later, and I had definitely kicked into very active labor and got back into the tub. The tub was not a good place for me. I kind of dissociated in the tub, I think. Pat likes to say that if I've had too much alcohol, one of my eyes starts to wander. It's actually true. And that's what started happening in the tub. He would look at me and my eye would start wandering. It was very funny. And throughout the whole time, he was such a solid supporter. He was totally silent, but he was right there physically. My midwife was always across the room, but she was all of my verbal support. It was the perfect combination. But yeah, so she at some point looked at me and said, so what do you say you get out of that tub and put on some clothes and we'll go for a walk outside? And I looked at her and I said, okay. And she said, I know that was just a big fuck you, but that's okay. So I got on my little dress and we went outside and walked around the front yard, had 2 big oak trees. We walked around the oak tree once and she was like, okay, well, we can go upstairs now. And I was like, I'm not ready to go upstairs yet. And we walked around the oak trees a couple more times. And I remember having the thought, I don't mind bleeding on the lawn, but I am not going to shit on the lawn. And I said I was ready to go upstairs.
I think we need to clip that and put it in the beginning of the episode. Oh my goodness.
That's totally true, though. There are pictures, and you can see the blood streaks going down my thigh. It was just ridiculous. We were on a semi-main street, but we were set back enough, semi-rural area. Anyways, so we go upstairs, and it's these steep old stairs, right?
Yeah.
And I go to the bathroom and sit on the toilet, and I yell, Deirdre! I think I'm pushing. And she was like, okay. Desperately trying to call the other midwife because she's not answering her phone.
Okay.
Or her pager. I said, don't you need to check me? And she said, trust your body. And I was like, okay. And she ended up getting a hold of a different midwife who was the third midwife who helped us start the birth center. So it was me and Heidi and Robin, and Heidi was the one who I lived upstairs from. And Heidi had been at school and just really didn't think things were going to move that fast and was having a conversation with somebody and was away from her phone. But for me, that second stage went pretty quick.
Yeah.
And so she got a hold of Robin, who drove up from 15 minutes away. Robin got there, I was I think you could see head probably. And Pat was sitting behind me, and I ended up on a birth stool, which is not where I wanted to be. That was my last place I ever thought I would give birth or ever wanted to give birth, but I did. And she said to Pat, you want to switch places? And he said, sure. So then my friend Robin got behind me, and then Hazel's head was born, and Heidi walked in, and then Deirdre turned to Pat and said, do you want to catch her? And he was like, sure. And so Hazel had a nuchal hand, And so before any of that happened, she helped deliver her arm.
Wow.
Yeah. And then he helped catch her, and she was born. And the first thing I said was, "It's Hazel." And then I felt this like kind of squashy, lumpy thing. And I thought, oh, I should see if this really, if this is Hazel. Are those testicles, or is that a cord? And I looked, and yes, it was Hazel.
Oh.
So yeah, it was a great birth.
Oh my gosh. And Pat had not planned or talked about catching before, anything
No.
like that? Amazing.
Yeah. He is funny. He was always like, "Well, I figure I've heard you talk enough about birth that I'll know what to do." And he was like, "I'll just tell you to breathe." And I said, "If you tell me to breathe when I'm in labor, I'm probably going to hurt you."
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
That is a great story. Oh my goodness. And she was 7'2".
She was 7'2". Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, she was this tiny little, skinny little thing. She got fat really fast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh. Even with breastfeeding issues.
Yeah, we never had supply issues. It was just exquisitely painful for me.
Yeah.
I found out when she was 7 that she had, multiple ties and also a really high arched palate and things that I didn't know about. I knew about tongue ties, but I didn't know about it in the way that I know about it now.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Ugh.
Yeah.
Yeah, you were instrumental for me because my first had ties also, and my second and my third. But I'm sure all of those experiences
Totally
you brought all of that forward, and I can totally see how that shaped you, and just observing you in birth settings and all of that, how it shaped you, and how perfect.
Yeah. So I think probably the other thing that really more than anything informed my, work in midwifery was my postpartum experience, because we were really isolated. The closest family we had was 3 hours away, and the rest of our family was a flight away, like a 17-hour drive, and in the first couple of months, Pat went back to work and it was in Maine, and he was working carpentry and construction, and sometimes they would go places overnight. So it was just me and Hazel a lot of the time, and I really, I think starting at about day 4, I started having really severe anxiety, like bizarre intrusive thoughts, and I would have hot flashes and sweats and diarrhea, and I lost like 20 pounds in a week. Wow. And this was, Pat was still there. It was actually my parents came to visit after that too, so they were there for part of this too. It was so extreme, and it would be these 4 to 6 hour periods where it was literally like 4 to 6 hours. This would happen, this would happen. Would start with the weird thoughts. It would then move through all the physicals, and then 4 to 6 hours later, I would feel like back to myself, and I would be able to step back and look and think like, what the fuck was I thinking? What was going on?
Yeah.
And I saw a naturopath for a single appointment at about 2 weeks postpartum. And she said 4 or 5 days was also when pain and cracks started happening with breastfeeding. So that was part of it, and I wasn't sleeping and all the things. But she basically recommended I stop taking my placenta medicine because I was taking my placenta, and gave me a remedy. She gave me sepia, officinalis, which is another very common remedy given to women. 24 hours later, the physical stuff stopped.
Wow.
It was a wild experience to have it go away so quickly. By the time Hazel was about a year old, I could look back and see that I think I struggled with postpartum anxiety and depression well beyond that, and just isolation, really, really isolated, and really low support. And we were really broke. We had a hard time making rent, and our rent was like $400, right? and starting up a practice and all of the different pieces. But in comparison to that wildness of the first couple weeks, it didn't even occur to me that that's what was happening. When what was happening in those first couple weeks was happening, I remember thinking, I don't know if I can live the rest of my life like this. And it felt like this is going to be the rest of my life. It was a really profound experience. And so that's something that has really come into the way that I provide care quite a bit. Because I don't think that people get enough support postpartum. I don't think we talk enough prenatally or postpartum about the physiological changes and the hormonal stuff and how to support yourself. And if you're struggling, how to get help and support. A lot of us just brush it under the rug. I mean, I found out from a lot of the people in my family, like, oh yeah, I had that too. I struggled with these things too. And it's like, well, why the hell didn't any of you talk to me about that?
Right.
You know, it would have been really helpful to know ahead of time because it completely took me by surprise.
One of the best things that, and you're saying that this all, obviously it informs how you practice. And one of the best things, I feel weird because it's kind of like I bring it back to myself sometimes. But like one of the best things that you ever did for me was give me the Edinburgh, the questionnaire ahead of time. So for anyone listening, that's just the questionnaire that normally if you were in a hospital setting, someone would give to you at 6 weeks postpartum, or what I think it's 6 weeks is the standard for that, which you could already be at that point way down the rabbit hole of this whole situation. And you encouraged my husband to take it too. And I had a similar experience. And had I not had that tool, I would not have been as self-aware. And also, even with support, even with your support, I had family around, it can still be really tough. But I knew that that's what we were in because of that simple questionnaire. And not being self-aware in that way, or knowing that, okay, I'm going to take it next week and see if it improves. Or I'm going to do it again and again and see if it's improving. I didn't do a whole lot because I kind of brushed things under the rug too. And I'm a much different person now. But that first time, it was like, what on earth is happening? And but we knew what was happening because you had the forethought to give us that tool. So that's just kind of a full circle thing that because of your experiences, I mean, you're directly impacting your clients.
I ask.
Yeah.
Like I ask questions. I try to give people space to talk about what's really happening instead of saying everything's fine.
Right. Instead of a 7-minute appointment where you're scared that they're going to take your baby away or they're going to do something.
Seriously.
Or like, oh, go see a psychiatrist for this medication or whatever when you really need actual support.
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, like, you know this, I know this, the Instagramming of parenthood. There is very, very little safe space for people to authentically talk about what's going on for them, where it's not being packaged in some way, shape, or form. And whether that's the really good stuff or the really hard stuff, when it's done on a platform, there's just like there's a piece of heart to heart that gets lost. Right. And I think a lot of the time, that piece of heart to heart is such an important aspect of working with people and providing care. And doing it before the birth and doing it after the birth, because ultimately, I've said this to you a million times, your birth is the shortest part of your time as a parent. Even if you have a really, really, really long, excruciating and difficult labor, or you have a really fast, simple, excruciating labor, or something that's like long and pleasant and easy, all of those things. There are so many ways birth can go. it's somewhere between like 45 minutes and 72 hours. And that's really a short span of time in the grand scheme of things of parenting somebody for a lifetime and of growing a baby inside your body for as long as you do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you have, besides the sapia, did you have homeopathic support in your postpartum experience?
No. No, I used some herbs. I was a lot more familiar with herbs then.
Mm-hmm.
My work with homeopathics in pregnancy, labor, and birth, and postpartum and newborn probably picked up more when I went to the Madison Birth Center.
Okay.
Because they had some protocols using remedies, and then community pharmacy is in Madison, and they have a really amazing homeopathic pharmacy, and there was just a little bit more space to explore it.
Yeah.
And a higher volume of clients and people who were interested and all of that sort of stuff. And it really honestly picked up the most when I went into practice as an independent practitioner, because I love working with other midwives. I love having collaborative practices. I've worked with a lot of different midwives. And the thing that I like about it is we're all a little bit different.
Yeah.
We all offer something different. We're all good providers, right? And what we do is really, really can sometimes be very wide-ranging. And so if you're in a shared practice with somebody, who doesn't have any experience with homeopathy or herbs, it's a little bit more challenging because clients don't know what to expect, or they don't know what they're going to get, or maybe they've never been introduced to the idea, or maybe they're more aligned with a different way of being. And there's, as an independent provider, I can, in a consultation with somebody, say, I use these tools in my practice a lot. I'm really happy to skip them if you're not comfortable, but I find them to be very effective. And if you are, for instance, experiencing extra bleeding after the birth, or the placenta is not coming quite quickly enough, and you don't want to mess around with anything, and you have a preference to go straight for a shot of Pitocin, we can do that, right? And there are cases where I'll decide to do that as well. But a lot of the time, we'll use something else first, and it's effective. And I get to see that happening over and over again. And I get to see it happening with different people, and I've had the opportunity to try and see what works and see what doesn't work, and start to understand and decipher, like, how do you determine what to use? How do you determine what comes next? How do you know what is the best remedy to use?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's not at all what you would expect. So, with herbs, it's a little bit more formulaic. It's a little bit more like this is for that, Angelica is for helping get a placenta out, and, cotton root is for giving you contractions, and yarrow stops bleeding, and shepherd's purse stops bleeding but might give you lots of clots, all of that sort of stuff. Cinnamon is good for this, or homeopathy's weird. And
can you, for anyone who is has zero background in homeopathy, I think herbs are sort of self-explanatory to a certain degree, but homeopathy, because you said it's weird.
I mean, I love it.
At its core, how does it work?
Yeah. So I like this kind of, I'll oftentimes use this analogy or this explanation with families, especially before I started going into more direct homeopathic practice. In the world of medicine, we have medicines that are highly filtered, highly refined down to their specific component parts, right? So on that end of the spectrum, you have pharmaceuticals that have been derived from X, Y, and Z, from plants, from chemicals, from anything else, right? And it's got a very specific material action on the body.
Yeah.
I actually oftentimes will put essential oils there too, because you're taking the most potent medicinal component, or one of the most potent medicinal components of that plant, and concentrating it. And then as you go down the spectrum, then you have herbs, right? And if you're looking at herbs, you can look at herbs in like the material dose where you're doing very, very highly concentrated decoctions, like in Chinese herbalism, or you're looking at like tea pills, or you're looking at tinctures are highly concentrated, and then you can look at different dosing mechanisms for those, or you're going down to like tea